The Ford LNT-8000 belongs to the Ford L series, and that's a range of commercial trucks produced by Ford between 1970 and 1998. Also known as the Ford Louisvilles, the L series represented Ford's first dedicated Class 8 truck. These trucks were developed for various applications, and even for severe duty applications. The LNT-8000 in particular was a versatile workhorse. You'll still see them on the roads as dumpers with both short and long-haul delivery trucks everywhere. They were built at the Kentucky truck plant, and they were well regarded by long-haul drivers. This kit was derived from the AMT Louisville line in 1970 and has been reissued many times over the years. The snowplow version itself is essentially unchanged and has seen multiple releases. The kit has over 300 parts molded in white with chrome and clear pieces, vinyl truck tires, and an improved and expanded decal sheet, and a super detailed snowplow and salt spreader assemblies. Taking a quick look at some of the body panels and the bed panels here, you can see that the kit is still in pretty good shape. And here are some of the plow and salt spreader pieces, along with the nicely chromed parts, which are just about right for thickness, and a full set of truck tires and axles. The improved decal sheet looks pretty nice. It's got full identification number sets and also 4 different locations to choose from if you choose to use one of those, and a couple sets of plates. They're in good register and very colorful. Construction starts with the engine, basic block, heads, and the oil pan, etc., the front end. Now, if you're unclear about any of the locations, etc., from the video here, you can also go and refer to the instructions, which are at the end of the review as well. I painted the main block parts a gloss yellow and also an aluminum or a silver shade on the transmission. On quite a few of the pieces, you'll find a little bit of flash around the edges. It's packed out pretty good to make sure there's no sinks or cold shuts, but they're easily removed with a sharp hobby knife and a sanding stick. And here you see the engine as it's proceeding along the colors that I've used for some of the add-on pieces, and there's some chrome pieces as well. And if you just continue and follow the sequence in the instructions, you'll do just fine. Here you see with the chrome valve covers in place, the engine is fairly complete. Here are some of the additional add-on pieces. You see the fan and pulley assembly there, and most of these are painted semi-gloss black to be added to the engine, and then your motor will be finished. So set it aside to dry. Next up are the parts for the wheel assemblies. These are the front wheel assemblies, and it consists of the tires, rims, and some wheel flanges. Now note you have to scrape chrome plating off if you want the parts to stick together. You just need to remove that with either a sand stick or a hobby knife to give it a good adhesion and the ability to solvent glue the pieces together. You see here the 4 tires for the inner rear wheel assemblies, and it includes the rims, the tires, and the wheel flanges, and those go together in a sandwich fashion, just like the fronts. Like the inners, the outer rear wheels consist of the outer rims, the tires, and the wheel flanges, and they assemble in the same fashion. Now, the rear wheel assembly consists of the rear inner rim assembly and the rear outer rim assemblies, and they get attached together. The 2 rear hub halves are assembled and then installed into the rear inner tire assembly and the rear outer rim assembly. Now, for the most part, I found that the tire assemblies are easier to put together once the glue dries on the rims and the wheel flanges. So then you just install rubber tires onto the assembled rims. Now we're going to work with the main frame assembly, and it's pretty important that you keep the frame flat, and I would use slow setting glue when you're putting the cross members in the frame together, and then make sure that it stays symmetrical and true 90 degrees between the frame and the cross members, and let it dry nice and flat so that it doesn't warp. So now we'll start with some of the attachments. Here are the rear axles, and we're going to paint those gloss black like the frame and add that to the frame along with that drive shaft. Look for the intermediate mid-rear axle parts you see here, the pumpkins, and we'll assemble those halves and put those together, and then we'll paint these gloss black as well and add them to the frame. Now we look at the rear backing plates, and they get painted gloss black, and then the back brake cylinders are attached to the backing plates. The backing plates then get attached to the axle assemblies, and the upper rods are painted black and attached between the axles and the frame assembly. Then the tire assemblies are installed onto the frame assembly with the metal axles just by squeezing them against each other after you get the axles through the through holes.
This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint.
Get these pieces out of the kit for the front end, and then we will they get painted black, but in some cases you can assemble these small pieces first. After you clean them up, there'll be some excess plastic on the ends of some of these parts you'll want to trim off, but don't trim off the mounting pins that are there. So the steering link pitman arm, the steering box, the right and left front spring, the tie rod, and the front axle then get installed onto the frame, and the front axle pin is installed to the backing plate, and then that assembly onto both sides of the axle. The brake cylinders and the front tires then are added to the backing plate assemblies. It's time to assemble the radiator halves there, you see, and once that's done you can paint that gloss black along with the forward drive shaft, and that's because we're going to mount the engine next, which means find the mounting locations and tabs, and then put the shaft into place and add the engine into its position on the frame. And by the way, you have to paint scrape off the paint too if you're going to glue parts together, like the frame mounts to the motor. Also, you can add the radiator into position with the upper radiator half. These are the front cab mounts, and you can install those unpainted like we'll show you here, or you can paint them first and then scrape off the mating and joining sections to make for a good adhesion, but then they get mounted into position as you see here. These are the rear tail lights and bezels, and we're going to paint the mounts there, black, of course, and then the tail light assemblies are installed onto the frame assembly after they're added, to those bezels, and use a little clear part cement for that to install those into position. On the fuel tanks, you see here the mounting brackets in white, the step plates, and the tanks themselves are assembled, and there will be a seam, so you either live with the seam or you clean it off and repaint or rechrome the tanks. So as you can see, they are installed onto the frame after assembly, and they look pretty nice like this. It's up to you as far as how you want to finish them off. The dump bed parts and frame rails are next, and as you can see, they've been given a light gray primer coat, and then they're going to get painted Tester's Gloss Orange, and both the underbody frame rails are painted gloss black. Here are the mud flaps and the through pin, the hinge pin there, and you see the retainers on the upper left. Those get cleaned up, and they'll get glued to the mud flaps. And those retainers, along with the bracket for the mud flaps, are gloss black, and then the flaps themselves are painted flat black. Now we'll work with the hoist, and it's kind of a tricky assembly. It's mostly gloss black, and it's got a steel color there for the piston. The hoist assembly is assembled first with the hoist carefully so that it will be operational when completed. In other words, don't get glue on the parts that move. So once it's assembled, it's installed into the frame assembly. I used some slow setting glue for the hoist, and while it was drying and in place, I used a stack of dimes in the middle of it so that the center would not collapse inwards. Take your time with it. The frame is really small, and if you pick it up wrong, you could cause it to twist or cause the frame to come apart. We'll be adding the dump bed parts to the frame, and first, of course, we have to assemble the dump bed, and it goes together like you see in the instructions here. By the way, all the instructions are at the end of the review. But then the dump bed gets installed on the frame, and the metal axle there is slid through the frame rails and the frame assembly, locking the dump bed to the frame. Now the mud flap retainers are then attached to the mud flaps to keep that into position, and they're installed onto the ends of the metal axles. Now I used a couple of 8-inch C-clamps to hold the dump bed together while the glue was drying, and I placed a 3x5 card between the clamp and the dump bed so that the clamp doesn't damage any of the plastic, only tight enough to put a little tension on it and make sure that it dried true and straight. Grab these items out of the kit, and the dump box guides there, they get painted gloss black and attached to the frame. And the shovel, I painted Chester's wood on the handle and steel for the blade. Now clean up the halves of the battery box and assemble those, and they get painted a prime color, and then of course body color orange. And then assemble the lubrifiner halves, and then that gets attached to the bottom of the battery box assembly before it is added to the frame. They get painted orange, and then those halves are installed onto the interior forward portion of the dump bed, and then you secure the piston rod of the hoist into place inside there. Get the dashboard and the column out along with the steering shaft there, and most of that of course is painted a gloss black color, but the insert, the dash panel itself, or the instrument panel, it gets painted a walnut color, and then it gets detailed with a little gloss black and some silver pieces. So assemble the steering wheel and the column portion there, and we'll add the chrome steering shaft later on. We'll continue with the interior assembly now. You see the seats there with the pedestal mount. Those tank-looking things, those are air tanks. They go underneath the bottom of the bucket. Now we're going to paint the bottom of the bucket on the inside flat black for the floor, and the side walls and back panel are gloss black. Now the underside will be painted body color orange. And now we've got a little bit of tricky business. The firewall gets attached to the front of the interior bucket there, and the steering shaft gets attached to the column at the end, and then the dashboard installed, into the interior assembly. Now that steering shaft will slide through a hole in the firewall there, and then we're going to add the interior assembly to the frame assembly, and the steering shaft's end is then inserted into the power steering box. Now let's start working on the cab itself, and you see the windows here, they're nice and clear. But first we're going to prep the body and the hood, I think, at the same time. Now the cab body has some holes that need to be opened up on the roof for the roof lights and the horn. And then go ahead and clean that all up with some light sanding. Make sure all of that's smooth and all the flashes removed from those parts, and they'll be painted next. The radio gets painted gloss black and installed to the interior center of the cab on the roof. And now the cab is added to the frame on its mounts, and locate those properly so that you can glue that into position, and make sure that it's setting correctly on the frame. And now we start adding the extra, cab bits, the frame for the mirrors, etc., the grab handles. Now these are chrome parts, and unfortunately, if you want the parts to stick, you have to scrape off the little bit of chrome where you're going to add glue to attach them to something, or they'll just fall off at the lightest touch. So very carefully do that, because the parts are brittle, and trim off the excess plastic from the sprues, etc. Carefully. The items, the roof lights and the horn there, we'll be adding that to the top of the cab. So carefully cut these off and clean them up, and add the lights to the front of the assemblies there for the roof lights, and then carefully again the chrome off of attachment points, and then also go ahead and add the horns to the top of the cab. Units have been painted silver color, and they'll be attached to the ends of the exhaust manifolds on the engine end, and then out back through and onto the frame area there. If you haven't done it already, now the hood is cleaned up, and then the light gray prime as with all the body parts, and then the tester's orange. Now the grille and headlights get installed into the hood after the paint's dry, and the air cleaner cover that gets painted orange and detailed with a little flat black before it's attached to the hood. Then the headlight lenses get installed into the bezels with some clear glue, and the turn signals are detailed with a little clear orange and clear red before they are attached to the hood. Continuing with the front end here, we'll use the air cleaner bracket, and that gets attached to the air cleaner. And the bracket is painted a gloss black, and the air cleaner is flat black. Now the air hose halves are assembled and painted flat black, and the air cleaner bracket then is attached to the firewall. The air hose gets installed between the air cleaner and the intake manifold, and the front bumper is installed onto the frame assembly. And once again, it's chrome, so scrape off that chrome where you glue it together. And the license plate bracket's attached to the front bumper. However, I don't put it in the middle of the bumper because it gets in the way of the plow things there. Now you can put the hood into place on the frame assembly, and you can leave it loose for display or glue it into position if that's your preference, but then of course you won't see the engine except through the grille. Speaking of snowplow parts, we're going to start with some of that. The frame mount and the bumper mount, the braces and the hitch telescope and the hitch, they get painted orange, and the cylinder gets painted orange with a little steel for the piston. Then the telescope and the upright braces are attached to the frame mount, and then the hitch gets added to the hitch telescope, and the hitch cylinder then is installed between the hitch and the telescope. And here are the next segment pieces for the blade mount. And if you need to, refer to that instruction. It gives you a fairly nicely detailed illustration of how those parts are assembled. And now the blade parts are assembled, the front and the back, and it gets pointed with the orange color and a little bit of steel. Now the end plate's painted orange and added to the blade, and you're going to put this assembly into position by attaching it to the semicircle mount and retainer, and then the blade assembly is attached to the blade mount semicircle assembly itself. Next up is the salt spreader, and that assembly is pretty intricate, but the instructions show clear illustrations of that, so take a look at those. And also the flasher box that goes on the front top portion of the dumper bed. So that will pretty much finish up construction. You can see the salt spreader and the flasher box here installed as after they have been painted body color orange. Well, there you have it. While your model is now complete, it's not finished, because now it's time to display this beauty on your shelf. Now you can see there's a lot of pieces to the model, and it's an older design, so there's considerable amount of cleanup. But if subject matter is the king, and for the most part it is, this is a great looking model. And you've probably seen trucks just like this in different colors all over the country, because they are the workhorses that get her done and keep the roads clear in the winter. Now this one also has the salt spreader and back mechanism, so it has an operable dumper, and for the most part it's pretty accurate rendition of the Ford LNT-8000. And it's a really nice kit. And if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf.
Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.